the importance of consistency, right? The importance of being present, the importance of individual, the teacher showing up for our students, especially in the communities that I've worked with over the years.
Of myself that when you are a leadership position and you have a goal in your mind, and as an organization you're always chasing those metrics, which is like a moving target, and in that due process sometimes I do not realize how far along we have come across, and sometimes we don't, like, I used to never celebrate wins.
Might be the day that the student who's been having some concerns over the course of the last couple of months as the school has started hasn't really opened up, and maybe that could be the day that they open up, right? And so,
You know, if you talk from your, when I was researching about your school, the philosophy like cultural responsible pedagogy or equity driven practices, these are such big and you know things to move, right? So how do you first of all take these big ideas and how do you translate them into action plans? So welcome to TomoClub Podcast series. Today on the podcast, we have the assistant principal of Aspire East Palo Alto Charter School, David TelleZ. And today's topic is going to be about how do you balance leadership and how do you celebrate small wins to large wins. What we want to create is a much more grounded, realistic view of leadership, rather than always the fancy and surface level talks. Much more realistic and hard hitting realities. And welcome to the podcast, David.
thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Yeah. Mhm.
Perfect. So, David, before I always begin my podcast, I start with asking if you can share a brief snapshot of your journey in education
Sure.
and what got you into education in the first place. And is that reason still valid after so many years?
Oh, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that last question. So I started actually in college. I went to Lily Marymount University in Los Angeles. So I started in college as a volunteer, I guess call it instructor, with
Hmm.
an organization called Peace Games. It's now known as Peace First. And so I started volunteering there. It was a violence prevention program. And so you would go into the classrooms. Fifth grade classroom was my first classroom I ever taught. And you teach cooperative gaming. So I did that for about a year or two, worked in different capacities while still at college with them. And then eventually I went a different route. I didn't actually study education, didn't major in education or anything like that. Comm studies and business were the focus. And eventually I came back around to education through Teach for America. They kept reaching out every month, every year. Every year they kept reaching out, and eventually I decided to explore it a little bit. And TFA was actually kind enough for me, for them to fly me up to the Bay Area and explore some of the schools before I even submitted my application. And actually, I did the application, went through all of it, and that's how I kind of fell into teaching. Became a history teacher at a middle school in East San Jose, before eventually going and teaching high school, I think for about 7 years in Summit, and then eventually I became the leader at that school site in Redwood City. And it's been a 6 year journey in leadership ever since. And so, like, kind of like a snapshot of just like kind of started as an instructor, then explored it a little bit, TFA, and then continued into leadership. Your question of if I think it's still valid. I want to say so. One of the reasons why I decided to step into teaching full time with TFA and at least exploring that option to become a full-time teacher was really an opportunity for me to give back to a community, to give to a community. Over the course of my life, I felt very privileged in terms of what I've been able to participate in, and I'm talking about like the different programs, schoolings, and stuff like that. And I wanted to kind of pass that knowledge off to folks and individuals, kind of similar in my context of growing up. So, and it's still valid. Still draw a lot on that personal experience to help out our families.
Perfect. No, that's good because the journey, because from different geographies, like different cities to different roles, people do tend to miss that prime reason that they got into education. So I'm glad you still feel the same, and because that's the best feeling, especially if you're working in industry. And you mentioned two things. First, TFA, I have massive respect for them. They run the Teach for All kind of program across the world. So every time I meet any TFA fellow, Teach for All fellow, I don't know what the guys do. I need to really, I've been trying to understand their model, but they create such gems of people who are so inertly passionate about education, who are so process driven, so organized. I'm like, what are these guys creating? Like, it's insane consistency across the world. I think there is some secret sauce in the program, but yeah. So whenever I'm hiring for my team, my Teach for All is my go-to place, because I'm like, I will have a lot more assurity of the talent quality. And very interestingly, you also mentioned about cooperative gamings, because one of our core product is actually cooperative game, where we create a lot of depend multiplayer games where students play together in a classroom to learn leadership, emotional intelligence, innovation. And that program that we have is still one of the most loved, most like recently onboarded so many schools on that program, and now even teachers are conducting those classes where they're playing, having gaming sessions in the school. So I'm a big fan of gaming, so you love it. Both 2 points you mentioned are like my two stuff.
Yeah, I definitely draw a lot on, especially when it comes to the cooperative gaming. So I taught fifth grade for about a year, and then I moved into kind of like a manager position with that organization. But before I joined TFA, before I became a core member through them, I became a core member when that organization
Mhm.
changed its name, came from Peace Games to Peace First, and then I became an AmeriCorps member with them, and I actually taught elementary school, again, cooperative gaming, pre-K through second, third grade classrooms for about a year. And so continued that experience. I learned so much in terms of what it looks like. The same type of cooperative game, but across different grade levels.
Mhm.
But again, I still draw on that experience when we're thinking about teaching social emotional learning concurrently with the content, right? I
Mhm.
always draw on that experience. And whenever I want to support my teachers or even lead a lesson myself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, gaming in itself create an environment where students are not afraid to fail. They pick up themselves, try again. They tend to retain those skills um, much longer, and much more with visual cues in their head. Otherwise, these skills, they become just theoretical and they never get applicable until you have life experiences, which will take like 30, 40 years. So I think gaming is the best
Yeah.
way to imbibe these skills in students in a much more relevant manner. So yeah, definitely. And of course, coming to our topic of discussion today, that um, because how do we we want to deconstruct your journey, and we want to extract a playbook of how do you build a culture where we are honest about challenges, and but at the same time celebrating the hard won victories, right? So first thing I want to know about this overall topic is, what's one thing that you have learned in classroom that actually has changed your approach to leadership?
Um, when I think of the time in teaching, and I'm thinking about like of all different types of teaching, really. It's something that I really it's something when as a leader, like I always try to model myself after the folks that I respected over the years, especially assistant principals and principals that I interacted. But some of the things that I definitely dive into when I think of teaching is the importance of consistency, right?
Hmm.
The importance of being present, the importance of um the individual, the teacher showing up for our students, especially in the communities that I've worked with over the years. If you have a great lesson, great. The students are learning so much. If you don't have an amazing lesson, that is okay. The fact that you are present, the fact that you are there shows a lot to our students and creates that consistency, that structure that some of our students really do need. And who knows, that might be the day that the student who's been having some concerns over the course of the last couple of months as the school has started hasn't really opened up. And maybe that could be the day that they opened up, right? And so as a leader, I realized that at its core, like the consistency, that presence of the teacher, of the individual, a caring individual, especially, is important. Goes a long way to building those connections that you want to see in the classroom, that community. But not only that, but also allows for an opportunity for students to engage with that individual. It just continues to build that trust, right? Um, Sometimes my teachers are absent. They ask me, "Where's so and so? Where's Miss so and so or Mr. so and so?" They're really concerned, but that is evidence to me that they're building that culture, that community in their classroom. So myself as a teacher, I Now, granted, I probably should have taken a few more sick days, but in the long run, they definitely paid off
Hmm.
when I made those connections, those deep connections, rooted connections with our with students over the course of the years that I taught them. And now I'm teaching their little siblings, many years removed from the classroom, and so that's really exciting also to see.
No, absolutely. I think consistency is the key. Very rightly said. Um, Also, I'll give you a personal example of myself that when you are a leadership position and you have a goal in your mind, and as an organization, you're always chasing those metrics, which is like a moving target. And in that due process, sometimes I do not realize how far along we have come across. And sometimes we don't, like, I used to never celebrate wins. Maybe
Mm.
while growing up, celebrating wins was not a culture at my place. So I remember there was a very influential friend in my life who literally made me, take a pause and actually say that let's go out, have some good food. This is an important day because we did something. So that became very important, I would say, moment in my life where I started appreciating things. Otherwise, even if I used to achieve things, I used to just smirk off and move on to next thing and not even celebrate. So how first of all, do you have that kind of culture in your own personal self and and the organization?
I think growing up, eventually, I did have to like stop and actually process and say like we need to like celebrate this small win that we've accomplished here. Growing up, what I can remember, again, I mentioned I had a very privileged life in terms of being able to go to private school all my life, even graduate and undergraduate opportunities, right? Were present and all of that stuff. I think for my family. Specifically my family, it was a major wins. It was the large scale, you graduated from high school or you earned an award that only like a few get to earn. So it was always those major wins, which instilled in me well, because it was like it was granted, like, oh, okay, great, you got the grades, cool. Let's move on, right? But it was like the major wins that always my family celebrated. And so getting into education, getting into leadership, that was still kind of like the similar mentality that I had in terms of like, we're gonna celebrate the major wins, right? We're gonna, yes, the goal is a moving target, but we got the goal this week. So that's major, right? Um, and so it took a lot of processing, it took a lot of reflection, really self-work over the course, especially of the last few years, to start to focus on the small wins, right? Because when I think back, and I still go back to my time in the classroom, when I think back to those times, and I think back when students were developing their skills and develop those strong study habits that you want to see from your students, right? And you're helping them do that. The fact that this student was able to write, at the very least, a handful of sentences to this one paragraph for a five-paragraph essay that you're going to want them to finish or at least write one at the end of the year, but they wrote a few sentences on their own.
Hmm.
That's that small win, right? That you want to celebrate. And back then, I celebrated those small wins with my students to build that momentum to get them to where I want them to go. And so moving into leadership, I guess for a few years I forgot about that. Granted, we were in a pandemic. We had just shut down, and I moved into leadership as soon as the pandemic hit, and then so I was part of reopening the school site as well. But I forgot about those small wins in the classroom, and so it took a lot of reflection. It took a lot of me to think back of like, how do I build that momentum with our students? And obviously, it's not the same with our educators. They're adults, right? They're individuals that have their own personal goals and priorities. But it still, for me, was important for me to celebrate those small wins with them, not for them, not right, but with them and build their momentum to success in that way. And so that's how I've come to that conclusion of like, today your lesson went well.
Hmm.
That's your small win. You know what? Great. What have we learned from this lesson? What can we adapt for tomorrow, right? What can we do that for next week? This particular student was able to engage in all different parts of the lesson and was able to complete the assignment today. Great, that is a small win. And so that's how we're building momentum, right? We were able to partner with a family and they were open and honest and wanting to partner completely with our community. Again, there's your small win, and let's build momentum from that. So being
Hmm.
able to stack those up to get to the major ones, to get to the data point that you want, to get to the survey results you want from your students and your staff and your family, to get the recognition potentially from the district. And so it's those small wins to really, really build that momentum to get you there.
Yeah. No, I actually, while I was preparing for this podcast, I literally messaged my team in the group that, guys, we haven't celebrated our wins that we have achieved in the last 30 days. And there are a lot if you look at it. So yeah, the team was like, yeah, everyone like vibed on it. And I was like, that's great. Um, Also, if I look at school context, right, we have like huge goals. Like, if you talk from when I was researching about your school, the philosophy like cultural responsible pedagogy or equity driven practices, these are such big and, you know, things to move, right? So, how do you first of all take these big ideas and how do you translate them into action plans, and during the way how do you divide them so that you have those small wins in the journey, because otherwise it's just such a big target in itself.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about culturally responsive teaching, when we're thinking about restorative justice practices, we really are looking at the students and who our community is. Granted, yes, we do have a large segment of the population that comes to our school, right? Hispanic X, Latinx. And then yes, we actually have a wide variety of students, right? But the majority of them is from the Latinx, Hispanic X community. But they're still individuals. They're still families, they're still students, they're still families with unique backgrounds. And so when we're thinking about how best to approach and engage students in the learning, we take that into consideration, especially when it comes to our content. And I've seen it. I've seen teachers come in with one goal in mind around a particular lesson, let's say a math lesson, right? They're bringing Monopoly money. Everyone's played Monopoly in the past, right? Everyone knows how to use Monopoly money. But as soon as the teacher starts engaging conversations with the students, maybe the perspective is a little bit different. Maybe it's not just about a math lesson, but maybe it's more about like context-wise of what a family goes through day to day, week to week, right? It's going to look a little bit different. There might be extra dollars to go in this direction, and you as an individual you as a teacher never thought about it that way as an adult, right? And so, thinking about that and learning more about what our students really, really need in that moment in time. Yes, engaging them in the content, but also moving along in their learning journey and also acknowledging their background and their experience. For restorative justice practices, uh, at the start of it, the very first step is building community. And so when we think about restorative justice practices, when we think about potentially what's the difference between being able to engage in one of those practices versus just immediately going to, let's say, a logical consequence of a suspension, right? The first part really in all of that is building a strong community because if you are going to quote unquote restore it back, you can't restore it back if you haven't established that community. And so when it comes in terms of bringing it into the practical sense, those are conversations that I have in professional developments with my staff. Those are the conversations I have in coaching, one-to-one, and even in observations, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about when it comes to equity, when it comes to um, restorative justice practices and all of these things, it really is taught concurrently
Yeah.
with our math lessons, with our English lessons. And so that's how I try to bring a practical approach to all of these different concepts.
Right. Okay. Well, that definitely does make sense. And again, I think those are very important topics in itself to figure out. Also, very interesting. I saw that your school has 100% college success mission, right? So for a student or a family in a community with significant systematic challenges right now, like you mentioned, um, that can feel like an impossible promise. So, how do you, as a leader, communicate that vision in a way that's that's both aspirational and realistic?
Mhm. I try to draw at the very beginning, I try to draw from personal experiences in terms of me being able to navigate a lot of those different situations. Um, Again, I go back to this. Yes, I was privileged enough to have the education that I have, but I had parents who first language was Spanish. And so
Okay.
a lot of the navigating really landed on me to be able to figure out where this application goes where could be more scholarship money come from, right? And things like that. And so always had their support, always had family support, which is especially important. But in terms of me being able to connect with the families and being able to say, hey, like this is possible, I draw from personal experiences.
Mm.
And when that is not applicable in a certain situation, then I draw from the community and their experiences. I mentioned before that one of the younger siblings actually just started with us. And the older sibling's already college graduate. He's already started his career. And I'm an assistant principal at a middle school. So the little sibling is just starting with us. So that is also a great example of say, like your older brother was able to navigate all of this stuff, right? And you can take the similar steps that he can. Not saying you should do the exact same thing, but if you want to reach a goal of a college degree, if you want to reach that goal of starting a career, we've got the siblings you've got your sibling, your older brother who's taking those steps. And that's the beauty of working in a community like this is that there is someone out there with very similar experiences to you that have taken the steps, those necessary steps first. And they're always open and willing to have to give that guidance to other folks, which is always important, at least for me, to continue connecting with my former students or colleagues that could bring some of that beneficial knowledge to our community. And so I'm still good. I'm no longer a mentor. I'm no longer a teacher. I'm now a friend to a lot of my former students. They'll ask me, Mr. TelleZ, can I call you David? And I was like, yes, we can. You can. It's a friendship, but that friendship also fosters a lot of great information, great knowledge that my former students are more than willing to pass down to the younger generation, quote unquote, younger generation that are coming after that. So that's always important. So in conversation with families. If they need a little bit more support, draw from personal experience. If that's not possible, then there's someone within our community, someone that we're connected with that can provide some of that insight necessary
Mm.
for families and students to find that success.
No, I think that's a beautiful answer. I think alumni network who are in colleges and who have graduated from colleges, I think that's the best example in which it can be both realistic and at the same time aspirational. I think beautiful because you have a much more relatable vibe with the people that you have seen around, and then you have seen them success. So yeah, I think that's a great strategy. And now also about the topic of celebrating wins, I would love to know in a school settings, what's that one win that we as parents or schools in general overlook, but in your view, it's one of the most important type of victories to celebrate with your team. Where do we miss out?
The daily small win. Is that a daily small win? Okay. Um, I want to say I have to break it down a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
I think for me, a daily small win is going back to this idea again, in terms of what I had when I was a teacher of creating that consistency, right? I
Mm.
think if I break it down day by day, if I break it down week by week for me, and this is a data point that I definitely use when it comes to, at the very least, my perspective and how I respond potentially with any next steps potentially, right? That could come about. It really is that consistency. Today we had 100% of our teachers present at our school site,
Mm.
right? Today we had 100% of teachers update their whiteboards,
Mm.
right? Today we had 100% of let's say a particular grade level that's been struggling a little bit with attendance. Like we're closer to 100% of attendance of being on time consistently, right? Those daily, which eventually becomes like the weekly small wins, right? Because if we can have the best initiative for math, for literacy and numeracy, we can have the best professional development this past Friday to start best practices in our classroom. But in order for any of that stuff to happen, there needs to be the person, individual, teacher, student, the person present in order for it to be executed properly and with fidelity. And so when I think of those small wins that just I guess like let's say folks who don't have that overarching viewpoint of a school site may not really realize I still go back to the consistency. All my teachers were here, all my students were here, they were engaged in learning, they were engaged in conversation, they were engaging in building community. Now, great, this literacy, numeracy initiatives that we're going to be starting can now start with fidelity because day one has went well.
Mm.
And so I think those are the small wins that I really look at.
No, absolutely. That's great. And I think with so much technological tools that we have right now at our behest, I think it's much easier to draw insights, the shareable insights with the team. And now we have communication platform as well, whether it's social media or it's internal communication channels, in which it's easier to put these things out, um, and won't take a lot of time as a leader. And of course, you have that vantage point where you can see things from a bird eye view and can come up with those insights. So yeah, I think those are very valid points. Um, Also, again, since we're talking about data and technology, I want to bring up that I read that, because you brought a learning platform in your school, you were able to increase the formative assessments by almost 25%. Is that right?
They might have been for one of the high schools because they're the ones who use a learning platform because their curriculum was all online.
Okay.
So all the entire curriculum was online, which means that students had access at pretty much from day one of the start of the school year to all of the different contents, to all the different subjects, projects they would be working on, learning from, things like that. And so I came into that particular school site already the platform launched and
Hmm.
it being established. And I think there was an increase, or at least increase in certain formative assessments. I think that included some that was a high school, so it was one of the some of the AP exams at the end of the year.
Hmm.
The numbers, or at least the data point in terms of grew a little bit in terms of the pass rate for our students. So more students wanted to take more AP tests at the end of the year, and more students were able, in combination obviously with the platform and other study habits and study resources, were able to increase more students being able to get that 3 and above out of
Hmm.
5 score for AP tests. Um, so it might have been like in connection to that in terms of being able to increase the opportunities for students to be successful on those exams.
Nice. Congratulations on that. Of course, set by predecessors, but if you have still continued it with success,
Yeah.
I really give that credit as well. Um, but I always have a viewpoint that you can learn from mistakes more than from successes. So here I want to understand that what's your biggest mistake that a leader do make or can make when they're trying to be data driven, because sometimes data can also be a lot more misleading. So if you can give us some examples, this might be really helpful for school leaders who might look at this video, that what are the pitfalls of being data driven?
As someone who was definitely data driven in the classroom, and someone who was extremely focused on data driven as my first and second year, and I would say also third year as a leader, I'm going into my 6th year now. I think it was more focused on spreadsheets, more focused on what was in front of me in terms of the numbers, more focused on creating that goal in connection to what I saw on the spreadsheet, right? And so I was really, really focused on, I guess, data on the spreadsheet, right? On the data and the data points that were coming at me. And the one thing that again, the skill set from like being a teacher, educator, teacher, classroom teacher to then being a leader over the course of the last couple of years, especially, they've slowly transitioned, or at least have become the leader versions of like the teacher skills that I had. Because as a teacher, I would provide context to the data. I would provide context, and I would actually make it a point to seek out any information, any context that I would not be fully aware of. What's the reason why this is the data point is coming up again, coming, or at least that's what's the data point that I'm currently getting. And it's one of the pitfalls that I had as a leader in my first couple of years is not seeking out more information, not seeking that context in terms of a data point. If let's say I want to increase literacy by 5% in the next 2 months, right? And I create this, and that's just based on the data point, and I'm supportive and creating an initiative around many workshops to target, let's say, a particular vein of the literacy in order to increase it over the next 2 months, right? And however, the reason why it's so low is because we've got a handful of students who've been absent in the last month at least twice a week. And so without me knowing that context, then I'm not actually really responding to the data that I'm supposed to be responding to. I'm responding to just like that final data point at the very end of trying to increase literacy. When in reality, I should be changing my perspective and really focusing on attendance at this moment in time to make sure that they're actually present, they're actually here at school and trying to figure out what the gap is there
Mm.
to for them to be part of our community on a day-to-day basis. And so, yeah, the context, I was sometimes just tunnel visioned. Sometimes I wasn't taking everything into consideration in order to build those initiatives. I would see the data points, build the initiative, try it, and then when it failed, right,
Mm.
where there was no post-mortem, or at least not as often,
Mm.
or post-mortem to see what actually went wrong or where was like the flaw in that way of thinking.
Yeah.
And now I do take that information into account. Now I want to know, wait, is this student actually here? Is
Mm.
this teacher actually like does this teacher need support in this area in order to like execute with fidelity?
Mm.
So I want to know that information before anything gets established for next steps.
That's really interesting. I'll give you my insight also. It might be helpful that the best insights from data I have got is from verbal communication. You know, when I've
Mhm.
actually talked to people, of course, at a scale of 100 or 1,000, sometimes that's not the feasible way. So you still need to have those surveys where people might not be very excited on every question, so they might just flung it. Uh, but still, I try to do it randomly, at a like 10% or 15% people that actually call, whether during my product journey, during the sales and marketing, or customer feedback. I think that's the best way. I have realized that uh, data with some verbal communication, then I'm able to relate. Then I'm able to find what are the blind spots where people might have not given enough time, and the data is misleading me. So
Mhm.
I think that's definitely possible, much more in schools because you guys are walking through the same corridors. So it's definitely can double check on that. Um, also, I want to understand that what's the most persistent or most difficult challenge that you face as an assistant principal? I think if you give an overall context to it, what's the first thing, and what's the first thing that you do when you faced any challenge like that?
Since the topic is all about consistency, I think
Yeah.
it's one of the things that it's a daily, weekly challenge. We can talk about consistency all we want. We can say it's important to have teachers here every day, but life still happens,
Yeah.
right? My teachers will wake up. Handful of teachers might wake up one week. Every single day, a teacher will be out just because they're out sick or because life happens, right? And so that is always a challenge, especially when you're trying to get an initiative started off, get it off the ground, get it going. That is always a challenge. And not only that, also with students, right? You can plan your entire week. You've set your you've set your calendar one-to-one check-ins with teachers,
Mm.
potentially one-to-one check-ins with families and students, right? However, if maybe one or two, three of them are absent the day you're supposed to check in, then that impacts your calendar, right? And so one of the biggest challenges right now is keeping that consistency in terms of your calendar. And I've learned that to be open and flexible,
Mm.
especially someone who was very, I'm not gonna lie, I was very rigid as a classroom teacher, and sometimes it's necessary to keep that structure and consistency.
Right.
Um, However, as a leader, as a leader, especially as someone who supports and running the school side, it's yes, try to keep the consistency as much as possible. But one of the biggest challenges sometimes is that you're gonna have to just like be okay not doing this meeting this week, be okay something back a day or two, maybe an hour or two, and come back to it, and just and be okay with that.
Mm.
And the it my I would say my day to day doesn't look so similar, right? It's always different. It's
Yeah.
always different. It's always fluid. Something always comes up. You always have to respond to something. And so the biggest challenge for me that I had to, and then I needed to also develop my coping strategies to respond to the lack of consistency in terms of what I am seeing, right? And so that's one of the biggest challenges that no one tells leaders is that you might had a set schedule for your classes, for your lesson as a teacher. You move into leadership, that consistency goes right out the window. And so, um, And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges, really. And then being able to cope with that, being able to cope with that, respond to that, being able to take time for yourself to make sure that you're also not being overwhelmed by the changes in your schedule,
Yeah.
is also really important. So I think that that really goes to more to a personal type of challenge in order for you to be more effective for your team.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It does make sense. I have a lot of friends who work in education and or they're having offerings, product or services for educators. And I always tell them the exact same thing that you cannot expect that there's a consistency or there is a predictability in a teacher's schedule. So you have to be much more patient. So a lot of school leaders, I know they are all over the place. So if they give me time, I know how much important it is. So so it is like that. And now, of course, any discussion right now cannot be without talking about AI. So love to know because I'm asking you from a context of also being a former math coach. I think that's in that way also I want to understand that how are you guys piloting first of all AI in for anything? And if yes, how do you see it trying to be adaptive to the current learning structure that you have?
Right now, the AI that our organization is really focused on is supporting teachers create lesson plans
Yeah.
through an AI program that they've established. And I apologize, the name is escaping me right now, but we did that. We had a couple of professional developments that focused on supporting teachers create lesson plans, activities, different types of things that you would see in the classroom, that manifest in the classroom using AI. And it's more of an introductory, introducing AI to how that can support our teachers, especially our brand new teachers,
Mhm.
develop that skill that takes years to develop of being able to develop an engaging lesson. And so that's how we are approaching AI. Um, as also another way we also are approaching AI is seeing the benefit of that adaptive learning programs that we provide to our students. Now, we've actually used adaptive learning programs for, or at least the school sites that I belong to, for years and years and years, for many years. I can name a few off the top of my head, everything from like Reading Plus to iReady to different types of programs that is adaptive. And so they've been around for quite a few years.
Yeah.
However, the conversation of AI and how it can benefit students, we're just starting that conversation. We're just getting to the point of like how it can be used effectively in concert with what's happening in the classroom, in concert to whatever learning strategy or any adaptiveness that a student may need in order to be successful themselves. But the first step, the first approach is really the adults learning about AI first
Right.
before we can even offer any solution or any recommendations to our students. And so that first step really is to navigate how to build a lesson for tomorrow using the program that was introduced to us in one of our PDs. And that's going to continue, especially as some of our grade levels this year, especially, are moving into more interdisciplinary projects. And
Mhm.
so great. That's a perfect opportunity for us to navigate what AI could look like and planning those activities.
Hmm. And how has that professional development impact on ground is like teachers are adopting it, using it, or they're still on the fence and they're still hesitant about it? Would love to know that.
I would say all of the above. All of the above. Being in education for 13, 14 years, and I've also been guilty of this. I've also been guilty of this as a teacher. Whenever something brand new or new concept gets introduced in PD, it always takes a little bit. It always takes a while to begin using it with fidelity, begin using it and seeing how it could benefit my planning, my approach to the classroom. And so something like all the above. Some teachers dove right into it. Other teachers use it here and there, and other teachers are a little bit more hesitant to be able to use it currently. But and it's just a tool, right? So we're trying to figure out where best this tool fits and how effective it can be used in certain areas. And so we're still trying to figure out where the tool fits, I guess, for lack of a better saying. And so right now I'm along with the journey with the teachers right now. It's like where can this work the best in order to impact whatever goal we want to get from it, right? Like if the goal is engagement, great. This can create amazing engagement opportunities for students. But if the goal is to move that data point and our numeracy, well, what does that look like? And so that's what we're asking ourselves right now.
Hmm. No, absolutely. I think it's a learning in progress right now. So, like, when was the last time you guys did that PD? Because I'm just trying to wrap my head around that because it's
Sure.
a fast evolving space that it's difficult to keep up. So, how do you guys work out that part?
Yeah, so the our school leaders were introduced to it at the end of last school year. So because as always, the school leaders typically start planning for the new school year in January, right? And so we learned about it and we used it a little bit at the end of last school year, and then our teacher leaders learned about it over the summer, and then eventually the rest of the staff learned about it at the start of this new school year, part of their professional developments. And so we're going to come back. We do every so often, every 2 months, we do a day where we do get together and we do run another PDs as a whole staff, as a whole org. And so that's usually opportunities where we can get feedback. We get to have conversations around if they've been using this program in their everyday. And I also have the opportunity to have those conversations potentially in one-to-one over the course of let's say the first quarter of the first semester. And again, it's the same thing, right? There's these few teachers who've engaged with it, are doing it, they're enjoying it. Other teachers who do it every once in a while, and there are teachers that haven't really looked at it since the PD. And so we want to see, we want to see, or at least ask those questions of like from teachers who have been using it on a consistent basis, and then teachers who haven't actually, for from both perspectives of how beneficial they found it, and also ask the teachers who have not engaged with it of like, what's the reason? What's that? At the
Hmm.
very least, what's stopping you from engaging with it, at least on a weekly basis?
Right, right. No, because there are definitely multiple aspects. Uh, from the first aspect of how to use it for lesson planning and your administrative work, but also how do you teach students about ethics and responsible use?
Mhm.
How do you create new assessments which and new assignments which can be not obviously done by AI immediately, but can
Mhm.
involve students using some critical thinking over it?
Mhm.
And how do you create rubrics and assessments so that you're able to
Yeah,
create those and identify those things? So, like, literally, for an educator, they have to change every aspect of the teaching to work with and around AI. That
yeah,
it is a lot of things to expect in such a rapid pace. And
yeah.
yeah, I think it's a budding field right now, and it has a lot of opportunities because even if you look at what teachers want is to spend time with the students, and this
Mhm.
can give their time back.
Yeah. I think about when computers were introduced, or at least the Chromebooks
Hmm.
were being introduced into the classrooms and what that looked like. They went from writing or pen and paper, pencil, right, to now typing on the computers. And there was a shift. There was a shift in everything from not only the way the lessons are introduced, but how you would manage a classroom. And so similar approach here in terms of using AI, same thing. It's like we're thinking differently in terms of what it looks like in the classroom, what it looks like outside the classroom, and yeah, what it looks like to use it responsibly.
Hmm. Agreed. Absolutely. So one thing that we always do as a part of our podcast in the end is we have one question which has been passed on by a previous guest to you, and then we'll ask a question that I would want you to pass it on for the next guest. So the last question that I had was, what are the from a school leader was, what are the pros and cons of giving homework? And what's the balance for a student in that regard? How do you consider homework as a part of the learning process?
So when I was in the classroom and I left, the homework that I gave as a history teacher, the homework that I gave was whatever that was left over, or at least whatever that was not completed in the classroom. Because I gave plenty of time to work on classwork, and the class it was project based, so a lot of the stuff that we did in the classroom was working towards that final product within the project, right? And so whatever you didn't finish for that day became homework. And so for me, that just meant that there's additional time here for you and also it was one-to-one, so we had a Chromebook, so they could like I could immediately see their work once they were done, right? So there wasn't like I had to wait until the very next day. So they would have homework, and so they would complete it, give them an opportunity to really think through. It was my way to not punish a student, or at least like give them, or at least not the check plus, but just like maybe the check minus, right, on their assignment for that day. They still have opportunity to go and work on it. And so that's how I viewed homework
Hmm.
in terms of being able to to give students the opportunity to complete whatever they were working on. Now, currently, I am working in a school site that slowly moving over to project-based learning. We're seeing that in a couple of grade levels, interdisciplinary format, right? But we're still giving homework, and the sense of, especially when it comes to our numeracy and also our literacy to an extent, because they have reading logs, right? But in terms of our numeracy, the
Hmm.
cons with homework is sometimes students and families don't see how everything's interconnected. I
Hmm.
think that's the con with homework. And so families or students just like aren't going to do it, or just like there's a misconception of like, oh, teacher doesn't look at our homework, or just like does X, Y, and Z with it when we turn it in, right? So that's the cons with it in terms of like not understanding that connection. The pro, especially now moving into a school site that is not necessarily one-to-one, and things still are done on paper and slowly moving to adaptive AI type of programs, right? The pro is just another opportunity to engage with the content. When
Hmm.
I think about when we reopen the school, and I think about the data points across different school sites across really the country, and the data points that we're getting from our formative assessments when it comes to students' current levels,
Hmm.
the homework now becomes an important extension of the classroom.
Hmm.
And the teachers who consistently get homework back that is completed, or at the very least is attempted, are the teachers who are making that connection between the need to practice more
Hmm.
and what this means for the very next day in terms of the lesson or the lessons that the teacher is going to be engaging with.
Right.
And so again, my teaching was before COVID, right? So it's a little bit different perspective, a little bit in
Right.
terms of like it's the extra time that I'm giving you to complete the assignment so you don't get an F, right?
Hmm.
It's so you can demonstrate your skill for me. Um, Currently, the con is I the con is that back then I didn't really need to work that hard to make that connection, right? And so like we're not making those connections. And so we're just some teachers are just giving homework to give homework for the sake of giving it, just because parents want it. But we need to make that connection. The teachers who are making that connection are saying, you just need that extra time to practice this multiplication table. This is what I'm giving you. You can use this multiplication table in connection to the lesson tomorrow if you bring it back complete. And those are the teachers that are finding success of not only getting homework completed, but making that connection, reasoning through. And we're talking about elementary and middle schoolers. These teachers are telling them exactly that of like, this is how this is going to benefit you tomorrow. And in some of my observations, I've seen our teachers engage with last night's homework really well of like reviewing it.
Hmm.
And those are the teachers that are finding success, and those are the teachers who are increasing those data points that we want to see in students' numeracy and literacy skills.
Hmm. No, makes sense. Absolutely. So, do you have any questions that you want me to pass on to other school leader? And I'll make sure that when I have that answer, I'll pass it on to you.
I think right now the question I had that immediately came into my head is it's like I think it's a combination of I'm 6 years in, like
Hmm.
and I would say, especially in certain contexts as a school leader, that's like, oh, that's many, many years of leadership. But in reality, for me, it's just I'm just getting started
Yeah.
in terms of this leadership journey. And so my question really is around um what are some of the best practices that other leaders have established for themselves to maintain capacity, to maintain a strong separation between what strong separation between like when you call it a day
Hmm.
to like your work life to as well as personal life. So like building that capacity, building those best practices for yourself to to maintain here's the word again, consistency
Yeah.
in terms of maintaining health and stuff like that. The word is escaping me. Um, yeah, just to build that capacity to continue in leadership, to be able to continue showing up on every day. Because I think about that a lot. I think about
Yeah. Are you talking about the boundary? Is that a word? How do you create
I
boundary?
would yeah, how to create those strong boundaries and maintain those boundaries between like it's 4, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening. You still have quite a few emails to get through. When do you call it quits? When it's time to just call it a day, come back tomorrow and continue the work? Because as someone who's continued past six, I would like to know some of those best practices to establish for myself.
Perfect. No, definitely I'll get back to you when I have that answer from another school leader. But yeah, that's a very important question to ask. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I love the overall context that you've set up from the different leadership style that you want to bring in of having those small victories to at the same time having those ambitious goals for the schools, which for the students, which can be at the same time realistic. So yeah, I think we did cover aspects so which should be helpful for other school leaders. So thank you so much, David, for your time today.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad we had this conversation. It was great. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks for tuning in. For more information about Tomo Club, visit Tomo Club or follow us on our socials. Stay curious, keep learning.